The young folks roll on the little cabin floor.
I never asked you to do anything that I wasn't willing to stand up there and say I'm for it too. And come on, not you go do it and leave me out. But you come on, let's do it. And then let's be responsible for what we do.
And tonight I want to acknowledge our gratitude to Almighty God and to our people and to our determination. We'll not fail them.
Kentucky home.
But I do not intend ever to be a candidate for public office in this lifetime again.
A Kentucky legend, the Chandler Years, the life of Happy Chandler told in sound. This is the radio biography of one of the outstanding figures in Kentucky history. In this hour, Governor Chandler relives major events in his life, brought to mind by rare recordings from the WHAS radio archives. Others who were part of the Chandler story add their points of view. In a moment, the early years growing up in Kentucky.
Well, I was born on a small farm about a mile north of this town. You know, they always say that I'm from Cardin. Well, that's natural, but I was born in the country on a hill about a mile north of this little town of Cardin, which was 700 or 800 at that time, about equally divided between black and white. And my father was a farmer, small farmer, and we owned the farm. They've said he was a tenant farmer, and if he had been, I would have said so. That was not so. We all worked for everybody. I worked on the farm, and we all worked for everybody in the neighborhood, you understand? I was born on the Diamond Island Road. My mother and father separated when I was 4, and she went away, and I didn't see her for 31 years. And my father undertook the task of raising 2 little boys, which he did quite well, we thought. My daddy was superintendent of the Sunday school there, and he went all the time, always went and cut the grass on the churchyard all the time. And finally, when he got one of those grass cutters that operated as with a motor, you understand, cut all the top fingers off his hand one day when he grabbed a stick and it pulled it in there. And I went down to see him. Of course, I was distressed, and he had great character, great courage. I was trying to figure out what I'd say to him to tell him how sorry I was, and when I was, as the book says, yet afar off, he held up his hand and said, "Son, look how much I got left." I was nicknamed by the people of that community Irish. Yeah, I was called Irish Chandler. And of course, I was Scotch-Irish, and that was quite natural. And I delivered the newspapers. I delivered the newspapers in that little town. I played baseball every day. Dr. Homer W. Carpenter came down there and made a speech at the high school. He was a Christian preacher, and a great Christian preacher. And at that time, he was the chancellor of Transylvania College. And he said a fellow that wanted to go to school, had courage enough to go, could make it. He could work his way. My daddy was not too enthusiastic about that. He thought that I was going far away, and he thought a high school education would be sufficient. And he's rather favored. But I decided to go try it, and so I left Cardin in 1917. So the old story that I got to Lexington in the summer of July the 1st, by the way, about 1917, with a $5 bill and a red sweater and a smile is almost literally true. I worked in the mill. I got $1.25 a day for carrying 440 100-pound sacks of shell corn with a Bill Blunder, who was a big black boy friend of mine, older than I was. And he was always proud of me because there wasn't very many white boys that did that kind of work. And I built up strong arms, strong muscles, which I fortunately still have. But I got those from hard work, you know. You don't get those staying around the pool halls, you know. I got my degree in a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science at Transylvania. And got my 3 years later, I got my law degree.
Happy was playing third base for Lawrenceburg. I was playing center field for Bardstown.
That's a fellow named Hubbard. I can still see him with his back turned to the infield. I hit 2 in my life to right center field. That means that you probably hit an outside pitch, you know. And this one I hit off Rudy Summers, who was a American League baseball pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, and Hubbard turned around, and he's still living in Louisville. He turned and raced to right center, and it was an open field, and he almost got away out of the ballpark. He reached up his hand up way over his head, and I was rounding first base when he caught the ball, and he caught it all right, but God, he robbed me.
It was a real close game, and Happy hit one left center field or center field somewhere, and it must have had a little height on it, but I got back under it and caught it. And Happy always accused me of playing pretty deep to begin with, and then making a marvelous catch. Well, I wouldn't deny making a marvelous catch if he wanted to brag on it and so forth. But they didn't have any fences close around there, and the ball didn't go out of the park.
Oh, he took a home run right away from me, you know.
And I didn't have to get a Pony Express man to go get the ball and bring it back in. I mean, they had room enough for me to maneuver, and I caught the ball.
I played with Lexington in the Bluegrass League, and I had a tryout once with Saskatoon in the West Canadian League in 1920. I had a tryout with Saskatoon. I pitched for Grafton, North Dakota in the Red River Valley League, and I won 12 of 13 games. And pitched a no-hitter against the Monoman Indians for 7 innings, and that was all the game there was, 7 innings. It finished. And I got a 7-inning no-hit game. And I enjoyed my baseball up there, of course, being a fellow from the deep south, going up and playing on the Canadian border with those North Dakota fellas. They had never seen a fellow like me, you know, and they'd always say, "Where are you all from?" You know. And I was a scout for Uncle Charlie Moran for about, and the Center College people for 10 or 12 years. After I came back here, when I was coaching over here, I scouted for them. Now the scout goes ahead of the team and watches the other team play, and I thought I had some coaching talents, and it'll show. I won 36 games here, you know, and lost 15 and tied 5, you know, and that's still the record here. And then I coached actively at Center College. I was over there in 1927, and I coached the freshman team, and I applied for the head coach's job when my head coach resigned. He told me he was going back to Washington, Hot Ofsty, an All-American end from Wisconsin, and he was my good friend. And I told him, I said, under no circumstances would I apply for this job unless you're certain you're not going to reapply for it. And he said, I'm not going to. And he recommended me, but Dr. Turk didn't give it to me. He gave it to somebody else. And if he had given it to me, I still might be a football coach. Well, I tell you, I think the thing that had more to do with it than anything else, I lost the last game to Kentucky Wesleyan 7-6. A boy named Gallagher threw a pass from behind the 50-yard line, his own. We had the game won 6-0, and the clock was going up within 10 seconds of the final gun. I can still see it. He threw the pass, and I thought the fellow caught it in Garrett County, but the referee said he caught it in the end zone. They kicked the point after the game was over and beat me 7-6, and Dick Gallagher, who's been head of the Hall of Fame at Canton, Ohio for the football people, wrote me a card or a letter every year for 25 years and said, you remember me, I'm the guy that made a governor out of you. It's a cute story. It was a true story. I didn't get the football job, so I came back and got elected governor.
A Kentucky Legend, The Chandler Years, continues in just a moment with politics in the 1930s.
Well, I had not intended to go into politics. In those early days, I used to say facetiously that I was a lawyer by profession. I made a living coaching football. And indeed that was partially true. And so I came here 55 years ago. And I made my first political speech from the back end of a spring wagon at Millville in the John Davis campaign in 1922. And Millville's a little country town down here, halfway between Versailles and Frankfort. And from then on, I just sort of got interested in it. And I didn't run for office, though, until 1929. That was 7 years later. I was elected state senate. That's a 4-year term. In 1929, I was elected quite easily. I had a Democratic opponent in 3 counties, Scott, Jessamine, and Woodford, and a Republican opponent, but no difficulty. We got a tremendous majority in. I went to the state senate 47 years ago this year now, and took my seat there in January of 1930. You may be interested to know, I think there are only 2 of us living that voted for the preservation of Cumberland Falls. The Insull people, who were utilities people from Chicago, had wanted to build a power plant at Cumberland Falls. And I'll never forget, I made a speech in the Senate in which I said that I thought this would be a tragedy because the Cumberland Falls is really something special. And I said, if we permitted it, they'd have a damn site and we wouldn't have a damn thing. And as it turned out, that's the way it would have been because they failed. That was a business that failed. And no telling what would have happened to us and to them. And I don't think there's but one other fellow living. And I think that's a former Attorney General named Beverly Vincent who lives in Brownsville.
And when they called the roll, I expected Happy Chandler, since he represented the Lexington district, to vote with the power trucks. And when they called his name, he said, some of you people have figured that I belong to the power trust. I belong to the people of Kentucky. And I'm going to vote to free Cumberland Falls and leave it like God wanted it to be. A great natural wonder. And I want the people to have a state park there where all the people will own it. That was the decided vote. And we won that battle by 1 vote, and Happy Chandler was cast that 1 vote. So he is the father of the first state park in Kentucky.
There were Democratic factions in Kentucky, and they had been at each other's throats. And Senator Camden, who lived just a mile from here. Senator Camden came to me at church one day and said, how would you like to be lieutenant governor? And I said, who, me? You know, I was shocked and surprised. And I said, I had just finished 1 session of the Senate. You understand? I had another year to go on my Senate term. And this was 1931. And the first session was just over. I guess that's got to be attributed to luck, maybe, being in the right place at the right time. 1935. That was the political campaign heard around the world. That was the only time in the history of Kentucky politics that 3 races were required in order to select a nominee and bring about the election of a governor. And I was a candidate in the first primary and qualified as one of the 2 candidates selected to run in the final.
and then ran in the second primary in September against Mr. Ray from Russellville and won the nomination. And then I was elected governor of Kentucky in November of that year. My opponent was Judge King Swope from Lexington. Early that year, the committee had met and decided to have a nominating convention. Well, that meant that Governor LaFoon would name his successor, because the governor always controls the Democratic committee. The Courier-Journal and Mr. Roosevelt and some others, of course, Mr. Roosevelt was interested in it because he was going to run for re-election, and he wanted to carry Kentucky, and he had a good base here. They decided that they would try to find out if the people of Kentucky wanted the convention, so they took a poll, and the Courier-Journal took that poll, and I think Judge Bingham paid for it. I'm not sure, but I expect he did. Barry would know, Senior. If you'd ask him, he would know.
It's much easier for the bosses to control a party convention than it is to control a primary. And some of those state conventions in the old days were pretty rough and tumble affairs, and it didn't seem that the general voter, the general public, got a very good shake out of them. The bosses in both parties pretty well controlled things. So it had long been the conviction of our papers that it would be a good thing to have both parties go into having party primaries. And in 1935, this issue became a very hot one in Kentucky, and the papers decided to put on a poll of their readers to find out what the sentiments would be on that subject. Now, I can't pretend that this was actually a scientific poll. Well, anyway, we went ahead and took the poll in the Courier-Journal and did it as fairly and as we knew how. And the poll came out overwhelmingly in favor of having a primary rather than a convention. Now, it happened that that was very much favorable to Happy's cause at that time, but that was not the particular reason why it was done.
They took that poll, and that poll showed overwhelmingly that the people of Kentucky wanted a primary. They wanted the right to vote. Mr. Hop Holman, who was the governor's secretary, called me about 8 o'clock and said, Governor Happy? And he said, yes. He said, this is Hop Holman. I said, how do, Mr. Holman? And he said, I have a message for you. At 9 o'clock, the governor's going to cross the state line at Ashland. He's on the way to Washington, and you'll be the governor. I just wanted you to know that I'm at your service. He gave me his telephone number. He said, the office is closed for tonight. I assume he said you'll come down in the morning. I said, yes, Mr. Holman. I don't anticipate unless some emergency comes. And I'll just stay here, but in the morning, early, I'll be there. When we got up next morning, both of us go to Frankfort. He was auditor. Dan Talbert was the state auditor. On the way down there, we looked at each other, and I said, what would you think of we calling the legislature into extraordinary session for the purpose of passing a primary bill, a compulsory primary bill to force a vote, to let the people of Kentucky have a vote on their public officials. Well, he said, looked at me just funny and said, I think that'd be pretty good. He said, well, we talked and got out of Frankfort. I called, called one of my secretaries and got a legal cap, that yellow legal paper, long paper, and went into my office and wrote it out in longhand. I didn't want to give it to a secretary. I didn't want to trust anybody. And the only fellow that had an idea that I might do it was Dan Talbert. And he'd gone to his office. And when I finished it, I called Howard Henderson, who was the chief correspondent for the Courier-Journal, and gave him a copy of it. So they went into session, and strange it may seem, I had called for a single primary. So then they proposed a double-barrel primary. They had no chance unless they showed the people that they were for a primary. We were certain to have a primary then of some character or some description.
So when they put up the 2 primary bill, our fellows didn't vote, and then they didn't have enough to pass that. But after the original roll call, we supplied them enough, and we gave them enough, and we passed the 2 primary. Now that meant that we were going to have 2 primaries that year. In the primary election, they ran ahead the first primary. But I beat him about 28,000 the second primary, just a month later.
The first term as governor and on to the Senate, as the Chandler Years continues shortly.
Joe Larry came from Grant County, Kentucky, and he joined me in my first political campaign for governor in 1935. He made speeches for me. I made many speeches for him out of the back end of trucks, in beer gardens, and in alleys, and anywhere, as it is written somewhere in Holy Writ, that 3 or more were gathered together in his name. I made a speech. This was my first venture. And a very happy one, happy in more sense, and this is not intended to be a pun, happy in more sense than in the name of the candidate, because in the years that have intervened, I have participated more or less actively in politics and enjoyed every minute of it. And after the election, he came to Frankfort as the 6th Assistant Attorney General, which I believe was the last one they had. And during all the time, all the years that have passed since then, he's been my faithful and steadfast friend. He was my advisor, and he was sober and discreet and a very strong religious man. And I have profited greatly by my association with him. As a candidate, Chandler was truly a populist. Chandler cared not a whit whether the county judge or the county attorney or any of the county officials was for him. Chandler, to take a homespun example, would come to Frankfort, and he would spend his time in front of the local drugstore across the street at Main and St. Clair. He said the greatest street intersection in the world, Main and St. Clair in Frankfort. Well, the first person that came along, in all likelihood, Chandler knew him. And as soon as the word got around that Chandler was in town, a crowd gathered, 40, 50 people. If perchance a colored preacher came along, Chandler had it made. He and the preacher sang, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." And by that time, he had quite a crowd of people. And Chandler was a candidate of enormous appeal to the rank and file of people, the greatest I have ever known.
We were $30 million in debt in December of 1935. I fired 9,000 or 10,000 people. That's a harsh word, but I relieved them of their job. Well, I asked a fellow the other day whether I saw in Logan County. He said, "I've hated you for 40 years. And I said, "Well, I don't blame you." He said, "You fired me in 1935. He was a Ray supporter. I had to fire those fellows, you know. That's par for the course, you know. So I said, "Well, now that you look at it back, which would you rather had, be relieved of your job or not paid?" I said, "I had no money." Well, he said, "It's all right with me now, Governor." He said, "I'm not mad." And of course, 40 years have passed, and he said, "I did pretty well. It probably was the best thing ever happened to me, although I didn't like it, and I was mad with you." You understand? Well, I said, I know, I understand that. But I either had to get rid of these people because I had no money to pay them, and we were $30 million in debt. Then I started to reorganize the government as I had promised to do. And if I may say so, I don't think anything in this lifetime has been more effective, and even today, than our reorganization of the state government in 1936. We prepared the budget carefully. I prepared 4 during my lifetime. two and one in 36 and one in 38 and one in 56 and one in 58. That's 4 budgets. And we underspent every one of them and lived within our income and kept a balanced budget.
1938, that's the Senate campaign against Senator Barkley.
I know that there isn't a single citizen of Kentucky who doesn't approve of an administration that isn't afraid to tackle the problems of the people of this state, isn't willing to be held responsible for every official act that is done by the chief executive or the legislature, and that isn't willing to take the responsibility and stand the gas and face the gun anytime. And these boys will tell you, every one of them. Joe, I never asked you to do anything that I wasn't willing to stand up there and say I'm for it too. And come on, not you go do it and leave me out, but you come on, let's do it. And then let's be responsible for what we do.
I don't know where I made that speech, but that's important, you know. I think a lot of governors will order you to do things that they wouldn't do themselves.
Unfortunately for us, we didn't make a good one of that one. Well, we made a good one, but the President of the United States and the Courier Journal and its associates all conspired to cause us to lose that race, and that's the first race we ever lost.
I promised you that if you'd elect me, I'd reorganize the state government. Well, did I do it? Yes, sir. I fired 9,000 people just after I got to Frankfurt and didn't create a vacancy. And by saving the people's money, we've reorganized the state government from top to bottom. I prepared for you, with the help of the Democratic legislature, a sensible budget. That budget makes adequate appropriations for public health, public charities, public schools. This year, public schools in Kentucky will get more support from the state than they've gotten since 1792 in Kentucky.
They didn't dispute that. I'll tell you again, I say I didn't make a reputation being a liar, and I refused to tell them anything that we were not doing or that I hadn't done. You know, I was as forthright with them as I could be.
I commenced the campaign in good humor, with high hopes of success. I have not gotten mad during the campaign. My opponents have gotten mad. They have conducted a bitter campaign.
Barkley, I wouldn't have run against him except he was no damn good, and there was. If we've got to make national heroes out of Leo DeRocher and Alvin Barkley, well, you have to leave me out. (1939). I was finishing my term as governor of Kentucky, first time, and in September of that year, Senator Logan died. He was a junior United States senator from Kentucky. My lieutenant governor was Keene Johnson of Richmond, and he'd already been nominated by the Democrats as my successor. And on the 9th day of October, 1939, I resigned from the governor's office, and Keene Johnson automatically became governor.
It becomes my duty as my first official act to appoint a citizen of Kentucky as United States Senator to represent our state in the Senate of the nation. I, as Governor of Kentucky, in exercise of the authority vested in me by the Constitution of the state, do herewith appoint the Honorable A.B. Chandler, ex-Governor of Kentucky,
I was in the House chamber at Frankfurt. I know when it was. See, Governor Johnson was not a speaker. That's an affected speech. That's not a natural. He never could. And he was a weakling, I'm sorry to say. Proved it every way you can, I know the stout fellas here, and I know the ones that are weak.
Chandler gets a new title, commissioner, and then reclaims an old one, governor. More of a Kentucky legend in a moment.
All through the war, I'd been in Washington on the Military Affairs Committee. By the way, the other night I spent a pleasant evening and the next day at lunch with Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr. He and I are great friends, and we're the only two left of the Senate committee that was appointed from the Military Affairs Committee to visit the world battlefields during the Second World War. We took off from Washington in July of 1943 and landed in Long Beach, California over 3 months later, and we've been everywhere, all over the world. Lodge is my very good friend, but all the rest of them are dead.
The purpose of that was to inspect the non-military side of the war. From the Committee on Military Affairs, there was Chandler and me. We were not going to tell the generals how to command.
Then the war was over on both sides.
Yes, it's my intention now to leave as soon as possible for Kentucky and have a visit with Ms. Chandler and the children. Of course, the boys were perfectly delighted when they learned that I was going to be baseball commissioner.
1945. I was offered in April of that year, and I'm the luckiest fellow in the world because my memory is good and accurate. I'd hate to have to concede that my memory was faulty, because indeed it isn't, Judge Stan. So that's just pure luck at my age, I guess. But in April of 24th of 1945, I was unanimously elected to be the baseball commissioner by the club owners, 16 of them meeting in Cleveland. And I had not sought it, and indeed I had not paid much attention to the fact that it was going on. But they called me in my office in Washington, and one by one they were on the telephone to tell me that they very much wanted me to undertake the job of being commissioner of baseball. I told them that I could not agree to leave my responsibilities in the United States Senate to the people of Kentucky and to the American people until the war was over on both sides. So they agreed to that, and so consequently I accepted the job but didn't leave the Senate until November of that year, first day in November. And then the war was over on both sides.
Of course, the boys were perfectly delighted when they learned that I was going to be baseball commissioner. Ben and Dan both said that they were certain that meant that they could go to baseball games free.
Well, how about that? What did you tell them?
I think that can be arranged.
The Jackie Robinson decision cost me that job. See, for 24 years, Judge Landis wouldn't let the black boys play. That's the record. And in January of 1947, when Ricky wanted to bring Jackie Robinson up, in the New York meeting of the owners, they voted 15-1 not to let Jackie Robinson play. 15-1. That was advice to me. So when I came home, Ricky came down here at my cabin and said, I can't do this unless you make a firm decision. And I said, bring him on in. So then it was 15-2. And that was a monumental decision, you know that. And I made that, and if I don't make that, he don't play. And I had Preston for it. Old judge wouldn't let him play for 24 years. That cost me that job.
I don't remember anything that was related, anything relating to Jackie Robinson that was related to Chandler not continuing.
Mr. Giles was the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds.
All that I know and all that I've heard, Mr. Branch Rickey was 100% responsible for Robinson. Commissioner did not have to approve.
And tonight I want to acknowledge our gratitude to Almighty God and to our people I want to ask all of them now that they've elected us not to leave us.
51, I passed up. I always thought, and I still think, that we could have beaten Wesby if we'd run, but we would have complicated the situation of a great many of my friends who had made arrangements with him and who were satisfied that he was going to be reelected and they could keep their jobs. So I decided on, not for me or for the people of Kentucky necessarily, but for them. So then in 1955, I ran for governor again. Won. Both times the primary and the general election.
And tonight I want to acknowledge our gratitude to Almighty God and to our people and to our determination. We'll not fail them. We'll not fail them. We can't afford to because they're great people and they deserve great things. And I want to ask all of them now that they've elected us not to leave us now because we want them to help us and we want to continue to have their good wishes and their goodwill and their prayers.
They've come too far now to leave you happy. Listen.
This summer the dark is our gay, the corn tops ripe, and the meadows in the bloom, while the birds make music all the day. The young folk...
Yeah, if I do say so, I could sing pretty good. I used to sing in the university choir at Transylvania. I used to be one of their soloists.
All merry, all happy and bright.
That's Mama. That's Mama. And my old Kentucky home. Good night. Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today. Yeah, that's Mama. Sing one song for my old Kentucky home. There you are. For my old Kentucky home, far away. Yeah, I could sing pretty good if I do say so. If I may modestly say so. I've been singing all my life, and I can sing that song, and that's sentimentally for me the most beautiful song there is.
Happy Chandler runs for national office. That story of 1956 coming up in a moment.
Ladies and gentlemen of the convention, I nominate as the Democratic candidate for the President of the United States, the incomparable A.B. Happy Chandler, Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
We thought that the Democrats were undertaking a futile thing. We thought we knew that they were going to nominate Stevenson in 1956. And we didn't think Stevenson would do very well, and indeed he didn't. Maybe nobody else would have, because he would have had to run against Eisenhower, who was a national hero. And indeed, Stevenson did not run a good race. The Democrats did not have a good year, and Eisenhower was elected. But my name was presented to the Democratic National Convention as a nominee for the presidency. And Joe Leary put my name in nomination.
By any standard, the governor of Kentucky is equipped to carry the flag of the Democratic Party this fall. He is a seasoned campaigner who likes a good fight. His name is a byword in every home in America. Give the Democrats of the nation the tool, and they'll do the job in November. Ladies and gentlemen of the convention, I nominate as the Democratic candidate for the President of the United States, the incomparable A.B. Happy Chandler, Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
I say this to you, if that paper had been for me all the way, I might have been President of the United States. And I wouldn't have minded because we've had some awful common presidents. And I've served with some of them in the Senate. When it gets to the place where Lyndon Johnson can be president, or Harry Truman. And I was in the United States Senate 7 years with Harry Truman, and I'm not a Truman man. Now, he made some decisions that were in the public interest. When he left there, the people thought about as little of him as anybody in my lifetime, you understand. And Roosevelt was no bright and shining light. And I knew him real good, too. So I wouldn't have been embarrassed to be President of the United States if you're going to compare me with people like that, you understand.
Waterfield ran to succeed me, and Clements and his associates ran Bert Combs. I have mixed feelings about Bert. I don't think he was particularly well qualified to be governor. I think he's a good lawyer, and I think he made a good judge, and I think maybe that was the place where he would have been better off if he had gone that way and stayed.
I want to be a little careful here because Happy and I are getting along good now. I don't want to say something which is going to reactivate him.
I have built more roads for the people of Kentucky than all the other governors from 1792 to the present hour. I mean aggregate and total, and all of them are free. Now, Bert Combs built toll roads. We haven't got any authority for building toll roads except what they pushed through the legislature, and it's unconstitutional. It's an illegal debt. My God, I'd hate to own those things. And the one he built to Prestonburg still it'll pay for itself. Some of them, I said this, and this is true, have any objection to building a toll road if you could pay for it with tolls. And if you could discharge your obligation within a reasonable time based on the tolls that people pay to ride on the road. This you cannot do. And he didn't get a single bid on those bonds. When I was the governor, I got bids of $298 on road bonds to build interstate highways in Kentucky. $298, unprecedented. We reinvested the money in federal government bonds at 4 1/4 and made $2.5 million while we weren't using the money.
He claimed they would bankrupt the state, and he had this little saying, and he is and was a phrase maker, you know, and he used to say, toll roads are no good. They start nowhere and they go nowhere, and you get on one, you can't get off, and you get off of one, you can't get on. I think Kentucky being a poor state, comparatively speaking, and with the great need that existed in the 50s and 60s, that toll roads were very important to the progress of Kentucky.
They were not necessary. I can't go with that assumption. That's not a good assumption. What do the toll roads do for us now? Even Nunn built one way across from Glasgow to Bowling Green. Well, I can shoot a cannon up and down that road 10 or 4 or 5 hours a day and never hit anybody. There's not anybody on the road. But here's an amazing thing that I've learned. If you promise a fellow a road, he'll vote for you. If you build it, he'll vote against you. I'll give you a sample. I built this road from Frankfort to Versailles before the interstate was built. And of course, I started these roads in 1937. I built 10 miles of 4-lane highway and paid for it from Versailles to Lexington in 37 and from Louisville to Middletown. Now, why did I do that? I hope to connect these two cities. And I started at Louisville and came out to Middletown. I started at Lexington and came out here. Never was finished till I got back. So I finished it, and they said that I built it so I could get to the golf course. I mean, all this silly thing. How silly can you get, you know?
Chandler ends 40 years in politics. In a moment, Happy reflects on 50 years with Mama.
And I spent $5,000 in '71 as an independent because I didn't want to have you, and got 40,000 votes. $5,000. And they spent $1 million over each one of them spent $1 million apiece. I wanted to find out then, know whether they would vote against party or not. They wouldn't in Kentucky. They want to vote a party. I was ready and willing, and I felt able to undertake the difficult job of being their governor again. But now that they've made the decision, I humbly bow to their decision, and then now it's mine. And those who want to write my political obituary are free to do so, because I do not intend ever to be a candidate for public office in this lifetime again. Now, some fellows cried when I said that, and they wrote me and told me, and said, please don't, but I said, no, the time will come. And when it does, and a fellow said, last night I heard you say that, said, you didn't really mean it, did you? So I say things like that happen in your life, but I meant that. They're going to say that I was the outstanding political figure in this generation in Kentucky. They're going to say that. I'm not in doubt about that at all. Each fellow's going to have his own appraisal. I'm not a hypocrite, and I'm not a liar. And I tried to do for these people, my devotion to the causes that I espouse are genuine. Right now, I told people over at the university, I said, I don't have to prove that my love for the University of Kentucky is genuine, because I haven't missed an opportunity to serve it. I've been chairman of that trustees board, of course, for 8 years, and I've been on it 8 more years. And of course, here's an amazing thing you'll be interested in, I guess. They've had 8 presidents of the university, and I've served on the board with 6 of them. The second one was kin to me, you understand? I bought the Coldstream farm and paid for it and gave it to them. I bought the Spindletop farm and paid for it and gave it to them. I built a medical center and put it over there and paid for it, And you don't do that unless you're concerned. I fought the battle of salaries for those people. See, when I built a medical center, the president of the university was getting $10,000 a year. And I called him away from a board of trustees meeting, and I said, Frank Dickey, I've got to get Dean Willard, because he's been recommended to me by Dean Lippard of the Yale Medical School to build my medical center. And I'm going to get him if I can, but I got to give him $22,000 a year to come. That was 1956. And I said, I may be wrong, but I always thought that the head man ought to get the most money. The fellow that's running the thing. I said, you're the president, so I'm going to give you $22,500. He said, I can't take it. I said, I'll get somebody that will.
Certainly one of the most significant roles that he played was that of establishing the medical center at the University of Kentucky with the College of Medicine, the College of Dentistry, the College of Nursing, and the teaching hospital. His support also meant that the faculty salaries were increased, and the total appropriations for the university were significantly increased during his term.
Roses in December. I won't tell you this. I thought people lost all the time. I mean, I didn't think you ever won anything till I got Mama. Mama came out here to teach school at Margaret Hall in 1924. I got to met her there. And
I was already engaged to somebody else at that time. And I think that he showed his perspicacity and his determination. He wasn't about to give up on that, and so pretty soon he had the whole floor.
We got married then in 1925, and I can't begin to tell you, no way to overestimate the value of her contribution to me and to our children and to our grandchildren and to everybody else. She's forthright. She's got a ton of character. My God, she's like the Rock of Gibraltar. I mean, she's as solid as a rock and fiercely
loyal to her side and to her husband and to her children.
He's terrifically loyal. Anybody who's his friend is always his friend, and he never changes.
Now, I said once when they told me on a certain occasion she was outspoken, I wanted to know by whom. And then I got in trouble, you know. And then I told somebody else once that she had bugged me because she wanted me to take her someplace she hadn't been. And so I took her to the kitchen.
Well, he's kind of milked that pretty much.
And some fella asked me one day, said, how is she? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I haven't spoken to her for 2 weeks. And he said, what's the matter? And I said, well, I hadn't wanted to interrupt her, you know.
Well, I think he does think that I have no difficulty with making my opinions known.
Financially, we're reasonably well off. We get through the winter, you know. But we would have been double well off if she hadn't had a proclivity for spending all she could get hold of. Nearly, she's a great spender. I'm Scotch, of course, Scotch-Irish. And she thinks it was made to spend. She thinks it's a medium of exchange and ought to be exchanged freely.
You can't take it with you. And I feel that it's just a medium of exchange. I don't see...
Exchange it freely, don't you think?
Isn't that what it's intended for?
Well, that was savory, you know.
The way that it's deteriorating in value, I think we ought to spend it real fast. You know, life with anybody is not always a bed of roses, and we are just a normal couple, and where you have 4 children to fight about, you know, and all of that sort of thing, you just simply demonstrate your humanness, and he does too.
Red roses of love
A Kentucky legend. The Chandler Years, the life of Happy Chandler told in sound. Historical recordings from the archives of WHAS Radio. Narration by Bill Britton. Executive supervision by Glenn Baston. Creative production by Jim Ferguson. A Kentucky legend. The Chandler Years was written, edited, and produced by Jeffrey Marks.